Trump has launched a sharp attack on Europe and its leadership, describing the continent as, quote, decaying and struggling under the pressures of migration while being led by weak politicians.
Will not be, in my opinion, many of those countries will not be viable countries any longer. Their immigration policy is a disaster. And I think it's horrible what's happening to Europe.
Donald Trump just blew apart Europe's illusion of strength by declaring the continent weak, drifting and collapsing under its own bad decisions. This was a calculated exposure of failed leadership, broken policies, and a ruling class that talks endlessly while delivering little. Here is the hard fact Europe cannot escape. When the United States stops treating you like an equal partner and starts speaking about you like a problem, decline becomes reality.
But most European nations, they're decaying. They're decaying. No, they should be freaked out by what they're doing to their countries. They're destroying their countries.
Well, Europe's decline exploded into view during the Ukraine war. The crisis demanded speed, force, and command. Yet Europe answered with conferences and declarations, while relying on Washington for weapons, intelligence, and strategic direction. Trump seized that moment and exposed a continent willing to fund conflict, yet unable to control outcomes.
The sentiment Trump is amplifying mirrors his NATO ambassador Matt Whitaker's worldview. Europe lacks hard power, lacks investment, and lacks strategic seriousness.
This looks like leadership theater rather than leadership itself. Symbols multiplied, speeches intensified, money flowed, yet decisive authority remained overseas, revealing a system designed for process rather than power. Ukraine became the stress test that stripped away Europe's carefully managed image and replaced it with visible dependence.
Enterprise and European stagnation and failure. The dreadful climate policies, which are making us cold and poor, are a sign that economically Europe has overregulated itself.
This pattern extends far beyond the battlefield. Europe drifts through migration pressure, economic stagnation, and security risk with reactive politics and endless moral framing, while control over borders, industries, and public confidence erodes simultaneously. When Trump describes Europe as collapsing under its own decisions, he is identifying a power vacuum disguised as governance, and Washington now treats it accordingly.
You can imagine some leaders in Europe are a little freaked out by what your posture is, and European...
No, they should be freaked out by what they're doing to their countries. They're destroying their countries.
Beyond the war response, Trump attacked Europe because its policy machinery freezes the moment reality shifts. European leadership locked itself into rigid frameworks, moral absolutes, and slow-moving consensus models that collapse under pressure. When conditions changed fast, Europe could adjust rhetoric, yet action lagged behind events.
Europe doesn't know what to do. They don't know what to do on trade either. I mean, I look at a lot of the trade situation that's going on over there. It's a little bit dangerous, but...
This rigidity explains the constant delay and confusion. Every decision passes through layers of approval, political balancing, and regulatory caution until urgency evaporates. What emerges feels polished, principled, and completely out of sync with the speed of modern crises. This is the exposure Trump weaponized. A continent governed by rules designed for stability, facing an era that rewards decisiveness. When leadership cannot pivot, outsiders stop waiting for permission and start dictating terms.
Trump criticizes European trade policy and carbon border tariffs. He is highlighting the fact that Europe increasingly protects itself not through competition and success, but through bureaucracy and protectionism, the route to failure.
That structural weakness becomes visible when tracing Europe's response to successive crises, each one following the same pattern of ambitious promises, followed by fractured execution. During the migration surge, frontline states like Italy, Greece, and Spain absorbed pressure, while Brussels pushed abstract burden-sharing plans that never worked in practice. Hungary and Poland rejected the framework outright. Germany absorbed millions without a long-term integration plan, and the EU ended up fractured, angry, and politically destabilized.
Hungary's government has launched a full-scale revolt, openly declaring it will not implement the new pact. Budapest says it refuses both migrant relocation and financial contributions.
The energy, Crisis exposed the same flaw at greater scale. After aggressive policy choices tied to sanctions and accelerated green targets, countries like Germany, the Netherlands, and Belgium faced soaring energy costs and industrial slowdown. German manufacturers cut production, French households relied on state caps to survive winter prices, and Eastern European states scrambled for exemptions after discovering the transition had no safety net. Brussels talked climate leadership while national governments rushed into emergency bailouts to contain public outrage.
Here, we want Europe to regain its civilizational self-confidence. Europe is in danger of civilizational erasure, and America's goal is to cultivate resistance to Europe's current trajectory by supporting far-right movements.
Security policy mirrored this breakdown between rhetoric and capacity. Strategic autonomy sounded impressive in Brussels. Yet, when ammunition shortages hit, countries like Czechia, Slovakia, and the Baltic states depended on external supply chains to keep commitments alive. Promises stayed centralized, execution stayed national, and results stayed weak.
The transatlantic alliance is cracking. President Donald Trump has gone all out against Brussels, accusing Europe of censorship, political overreach, and a dangerous identity crisis.
Trump's attack hit harder because these weren't isolated failures. Recent crises across different domains revealed the same institutional reflex toward deflection over delivery. During the COVID vaccine rollout, Brussels centralized procurement, promised speed and fairness, then watched the UK and US vaccinate faster, while several EU states waited, renegotiated contracts, and shifted blame. The result looked orderly on paper and sluggish in reality.
Militants who support Hamas who've been attacking ships passing through the Red Sea.
This week, a Norwegian oil tanker was hit by anti-ship missiles and caught fire.
The Red Sea shipping crisis reinforced this pattern in real time. As attacks disrupted trade lanes vital to Italy, Germany, and the Netherlands, Europe announced missions, issued statements, and debated mandates, while insurers raised premiums and companies rerouted ships at massive cost. Commerce demanded immediate protection. Deliberation arrived instead.
That was pretty amazing. You're talking about, is that European Union or is it, who did that? European Union or UK?
Yeah, European Commission.
Whoa, that's a nasty one.
Even strategic presence abroad collapsed under the same dynamics. After years of European engagement in the Sahel, withdrawals from Mali and Burkina Faso left a vacuum filled by instability, abandoning commitments without a replacement plan. Trump understood this record, a continent that debates while circumstances deteriorate, and used it to justify escalating pressure beyond policy criticism into diplomatic confrontation.
Of a broadside on Europe, which he says is strangled by regulation, undermined by uncontrolled immigration, underinvesting in defense, and obsessed with wokery. Now,
the exposure turned personal when Trump transformed alliance language into hierarchy. When he joked that NATO calls me daddy, he stripped away decades of diplomatic polish and revealed the power balance as he sees it. Europe depends, America commands. What followed proved more significant than the provocation itself: silence instead of pushback, absorption instead of resistance.
Europe has to be very careful. They're doing a lot of things. We want to keep Europe Europe. Europe is going in some bad directions. It's very bad for the people.
Britain's response demonstrated how little protection traditional diplomacy offers anymore. London tried ceremony as influence, and learned the hard way that pageantry buys nothing. A second state visit promised access and insulation. Instead, it delivered public criticism and direct shots at Europe's core cities. That episode shattered a long-held assumption across the continent that charm still equals control. It does not. When deference produces, exposure, leverage has already moved.
That's just published now that the EU is a decaying group of nations run by weak people. The US has said in its security strategy that it is effectively looking to undermine the EU.
The attack on London and Paris pushed the argument beyond policy critiques and into identity politics. By framing these capitals as symbols of change driven by leadership choices, Trump tied governance to visible outcomes people recognize in daily life. This bypassed statistics and landed in lived experience, turning cities into cautionary tales and accelerating reputational damage. Washington amplified rather than softened this message, signaling a strategic shift rather than rhetorical excess. The interview was promoted, framed as truth-telling, and carried forward without hesitation. Europe faced a message delivered with confidence and continuity, a warning that this line of attack would continue rather than fade.
A little freaked out by what your posture is, and European...
No, they should be freaked out by what they're doing to their countries. They're destroying their country.
That was a clip from his 45-minute conversation with Politico's Dasha Burns.
I think they're weak, but I also think that they want to be so politically correct. I think they don't know what to do. Europe doesn't know what.
The pressure broadened from rhetoric into electoral interference when Trump floated endorsements inside Europe. Elections became terrain, migration became messaging, and sovereignty became the wedge. The mere possibility forced Brussels into defense, because centralized authority strains when legitimacy depends on public belief. External pressure finds traction where internal confidence runs thin. Germany's pushback revealed the strain building inside the alliance. Berlin broke formation and spoke back, calling the claims incomprehensible and asserting European self-reliance. This exposed internal fractures at a critical moment. A bloc under simultaneous pressure from Washington and domestic recalibration shows seams, and adversarial strategies exploit visible division.
It talks about European nations becoming unreliable allies. That feeling surely is becoming mutual. In Europe, they are angry, some unwilling to articulate it.
Foreign Secretary, do you trust the Americans on Ukraine?
What began as political theater hardened into strategic doctrine, marking a fundamental shift in how Washington views Europe. The national security strategy used language Europe never expected from its closest partner: civilizational erosion, democratic instability, unreliable allies. That shift changed the temperature from rhetoric to architecture. Once concerns enter doctrine, behavior follows, and Europe felt the downgrade immediately. Finally, Europe's regulatory retreat under external pressure confirmed its vulnerability to coordinated challenge. Flagship rules softened under backlash, timelines stretched, enforcement blurred. This rhythm invites escalation. Advance ambitious frameworks, then withdraw when resistance materializes, advertising both ambition and fragility simultaneously.